Pennies on the dollar. That's how some Louisiana fishermen describe their livelihoods.
The shrimpers are asking for federal assistance because of the explosion of imported shrimp and fear they won't be able to feed their families if they don't get it.
The shrimp industry in Louisiana, worth a staggering $1.3 billion, has long been the lifeblood of the state. For generations, it has provided sustenance, supported local economies, and preserved a rich cultural heritage. Yet this vital industry now teeters on the edge of extinction. Shrimping in Louisiana isn't just an occupation, it's a deeply ingrained way of life. But as storms of economic, environmental, and competitive forces converge, this way of life faces its gravest threat to date. Shrimping in Louisiana has roots that extend back more than a century. Initially, small family-run operations dotted the coastal waters, but over time, these modest enterprises flourished into a massive industry. By the mid-20th century, shrimp had become Louisiana's most valuable seafood, representing both the state's economic prowess and cultural identity. In fact, 90% of the shrimp harvested in the Gulf of Mexico comes from Louisiana's waters, and the industry provides employment for over 15,000 people. For decades, Louisiana's shrimpers were proud of their abundant catch, contributing to the thriving Gulf seafood market. Families depended on the sea, not just for income, but for their identity, passing down knowledge and practices from generation to generation. It was more than a job. It was a tradition, a bond to the land and water, and a symbol of resilience. However, today, that once thriving tradition faces an existential crisis. The first blow to Louisiana's shrimp industry came from a flood of cheaper foreign shrimp imports. In the early 2000s, countries like China, Thailand, and India began exporting shrimp to the U.S. in massive quantities. These countries operate with lower labor and production costs, allowing them to sell shrimp at prices far below what domestic shrimpers could manage. Suddenly, shrimp from halfway around the world was appearing on American plates at prices that Louisiana shrimpers simply couldn't compete with. As a result, shrimpers who once sold their catch for $4 per pound are now lucky to get $1.50. Some are forced to sell their shrimp below cost just to remain in business. This underpricing has devastated local shrimpers, pushing many to the brink of bankruptcy. The impact of foreign competition has been so severe that some shrimpers have abandoned the trade entirely, selling their boats or turning to other types of work to survive. But economic hardship is only one piece of the problem. The environment, long the shrimpers' ally, has now become a formidable adversary. The waters of the Gulf of Mexico are warming faster than most other regions on the planet, a consequence of accelerating climate change. Warmer water temperatures have disrupted the delicate ecosystems that shrimp rely on, making it harder for them to reproduce and thrive. Compounding the problem is the lingering shadow of the 2010 BP oil spill, one of the worst environmental disasters in U.S. history. More than a decade later, the Gulf's ecosystem has not fully recovered. Shrimp populations, which are highly sensitive to changes in temperature and water quality, were severely affected. The spill tainted the waters, disrupted breeding patterns, and destroyed habitats. While the industry has rebounded in some ways, shrimpers still report catching far fewer shrimp than they did before the disaster. The interplay of climate change and environmental degradation has created a perfect storm for Louisiana shrimpers. One that threatens to sink their way of life for good. The collapse of Louisiana's shrimp industry doesn't just affect the shrimpers themselves. The ripple effects extend far beyond the docks. Entire communities that depend on the shrimp trade are now struggling to survive. Processing plants that once bustled with activity are now closing their doors. Seafood markets and restaurants, once thriving hubs of local culture and commerce, are facing dwindling supplies and shuttering at alarming rates. Local economies that were built around shrimping are now crumbling. In small coastal towns, where generations of families made their living from the sea, people are being forced to leave in search of work. The decline of the shrimp industry is causing a wider economic and social collapse, stripping these communities of their identity and their future. Despite the grim outlook, Louisiana's shrimpers are not ready to give up the fight. Many are rallying for change, demanding the government impose tariffs on foreign shrimp to level the playing field. They are pushing for stronger regulations on shrimp imports and seeking federal assistance to help keep the industry competitive. While some measures have been put in place, they've proven insufficient to stem the tide of decline. Tariffs and regulations have only marginally raised the price of foreign shrimp, and for many Louisiana shrimpers, the help has come too little. Too late. The challenges remain daunting. Climate change, overfishing, and the relentless march of globalization have all taken a toll. Yet, shrimpers are holding on, hoping that the tide will turn in their favor. They're determined to keep their boats afloat, despite the waves crashing against them. The future of Louisiana's shrimp industry hangs in the balance. Will it be a story of resilience and revival, or will it become yet another chapter in the growing list of industries lost to globalization and environmental catastrophe? If foreign shrimp continue to dominate the market, if climate change continues to ravage the Gulf, and if federal support remains too weak, the shrimp boats of Louisiana may one day be little more than relics of a bygone era. This isn't just a story of economics. It's a story of culture, tradition, and a way of life that has endured for over a century. The next time you sit down to a plate of shrimp, pause for a moment. Consider where that shrimp came from, and think about the thousands of families whose livelihoods depend on your choice. The answer to that question, whether your shrimp came from a local Louisiana fisher or a foreign import, could determine whether this iconic industry survives or becomes a distant memory. Louisiana's shrimp industry is at a crossroads. The forces of foreign competition, climate change, and environmental disasters have converged, leaving the future of this $1.3 billion industry in jeopardy. For generations, Louisiana's shrimpers have braved storms, economic downturns, and environmental challenges. But today, they face their most daunting battle yet. Whether they emerge victorious or are swept away by the tides of change remains uncertain. The survival of Louisiana's shrimp industry and the communities that depend on it may well depend on the choices we make today.